Hey folks, welcome again to the Heritage Wealth Planning YouTube channel. This episode is going to be the conclusion of the book, Strategic Money Planning, 8 Ways to Get Your Financial House in Order. And if you've watched the previous, there's actually 8 previous videos. I certainly appreciate you hanging in there with me. And at the end of this episode, I'll share with you a trick on how you can get this book for free. Just pay shipping. It's pretty easy. And I'll share that with you here in just a second. But I just appreciate you coming on board and hopefully learning a thing or two about your own financial planning. And hopefully the YouTube channel as well as the book can give you some guidance on ways to better your own financial situation. What it all comes down to is the book is based on thousands of hours of experience of my own personal financial planning, but also as a professional financial planner since 1998. And the number one thing, if I could share with you one thing from the book, is that you've got to remember that debt is your enemy. Now, I know debt gets a lot of strategies where you can say, I can use debt, leverage, and arbitrage to increase my net worth. I hear that all the time. In an Excel spreadsheet, it works like a charm. The question is, does it work in real life? And the answer is not that much. I mean, there are people who have borrowed successfully. Borrow and leverage are the same thing. They turn around that borrowing at, say, 5%, and then they turn around and we're able to get 10% back on the investments. Yeah, it can work. I mean, you can borrow against your home right now at 3.75 and deduct the interest. And you can put that money that you take from your home in the stock market. And if you look historically at the markets, it's average 8-9%. On paper, that works like a charm. The problem is the debt is fixed and the asset or the income is variable. So the debt stays like this, but on average, the stock market falls once every 40% of the time. So if you have 10 years, 4 of those years, you're going to have a negative year. On top of that, once every 3.5 to 4.5 years, the market falls 25%. On top of that, every year, the market goes down from head to bottom, top to bottom, 15% or so. So if you've borrowed when the market's at a high, so you borrowed against your home at 3.5%, you're saying, yeah, just put in the market, I can average 8%, but you happen to buy in when the market's at the high, October 2007, January 2000, all those days look familiar. And then all of a sudden, boom, it just drops like a brick in water. Yeah, you might be able to, if you could average over time, you get 8%. But when the market is now down, say $200,000 is now worth $100,000, and yet you still owe $200,000, do you have the wherewithal to hang in there? And the answer is probably not. The vast majority of us don't, which is why you don't borrow to invest. You don't borrow at a fixed rate to invest in a risky variable rate. It just doesn't make sense to do. It just doesn't, because the market fluctuates and your debt is fixed. So remember, debt is your enemy. On top of that, debt also limits your ability to do what you want. You want to go move to Seattle and try out for the minor league Seattle Pilots baseball team. Well, you can't do that if you have $300,000 of credit card, student loan, and mortgage debt. You have to find a job to pay the debt. I mean, in theory, you can walk away from it and go bankrupt. And I mean, people do on occasion. I don't recommend that. And you shouldn't do that because you borrow the money. But if you have the debt, it's limited on what you can do. If you don't have the debt, you can go and live on an organic farm in East Tennessee if you want. That's fine. If you don't have the debt, because you can up and move as you want. Debt is the enemy. It keeps you chained to where you are. And the one drawback is if something were to happen on your ability to pay back that debt, you're going to be in a world of hurt. It's not good. So avoid debt. I'm not going to say avoid it like the plague, because I have debt. I mean, how else you buy a house? Well, I get that. Which is another chapter of my book is, do you really need to buy the house versus renting? And the corollary of that is, if you do decide to buy a house, do you put on a fixed or variable rate loan? And so both of these answers to that question go, how long do you think you're going to be in your house? If you think you'll be in your house more than 5 years, then you should probably get a fixed rate mortgage and you should probably buy. I have no problem with that. If you're just starting out and you're starter home where you're just not quite sure, or you want to have a bigger family and you're going to start out having a kid, and maybe don't buy a fixed rate mortgage and maybe just rent until you get a little bit more settled in. Because selling a house is a risky proposition. It doesn't happen as easy as you would think it does when the real estate averages 4% a year and is in high demand. It just doesn't. There's always a time where the market turns against you. And if that's the time when you're trying to sell, like we talked about a lot in our book with Brenda and Kevin, our fictional characters here, you're doomed. You can't move. And so be careful on buying a house. Be careful what kind of mortgage you take. And again, if you're going to be in there, use the 5 years, your 5 years as your rule of thumb. If you're going to be in there 5 years, fixed rate and buy. I have no problem with that at all. If you're not quite sure, variable rate if you do buy, but maybe just hang tight for the first 12 to 18 months and see how things shake out. Don't get sucked in the great schools trap. I'm telling you, and this is a tough one because how else do you determine what schools are good or not? It's tough. If you can get to know the principal somehow, just research the person, and just find out if there's any way you can get to know the principal. I'd be cautious of just going on greatschools.org and looking at the ratings they have on there because you don't know who those people are. And that's a tough one. And the drawback, of course, is if you go into a non-great schools district, a non-highly rated district, does that mean it's going to be going down? Has it bottom out? You just don't know. And I mean, so it's a tough one there. But don't give away your firstborn to get your kids in a great schools district. I'm telling you, I'm not saying it's not worth it. But the issue is if you have a great schools district now that you paid a premium on, and suddenly that turns against you, you're not going to recoup that premium you paid. And again, you might have negative equity and you'll be upside down when it comes time to sell your house for whatever reason that is. I just want to real quick talk about estate planning. Get your powers of attorney done. Make sure your beneficiary designations are up to date. Make sure you have a guardianship established in your will. Get your will. I can't tell you how many people don't have wills. Man, you can go on LegalZoom.com for a couple $100 and at least get a simple will drawn up, but I don't recommend that. I recommend finding a real live human being, an estate planning attorney. And like I said in my notes in my previous episode, I have recommendations if you need some. Get an estate planning attorney to draw up your will. It's money well spent. It might be a couple hundred, $750 or something like that for a basic will and all the other documents that go with it, a healthcare directive, durable powers of attorney, letter of instruction, you name it. There's about 5 different documents you want in there, but get a real live human being to draw it up. And again, someone who practices estate planning, not someone who does, trial attorney or something like that, because that person may not know the intricacies of estate planning. And it changes all the time and is state specific as well. It's more state specific than federal specific. So you want to make sure you have someone who knows estate planning who can draw it up for you. At the minimum, just get a legalzoom.com. I got no problem with that. But if you really want to make sure your stuff is squared away and have a point of reference that you can fall back on should you need, an estate planning attorney is the way to go for sure. We talked about buying versus leasing a vehicle. Again, my thought has always been you should buy or finance a car. And then I've had some of the last 10 years, I had great experience with leases. The question in that regard is, what is it that you need to happen with that vehicle? Are you moving 4 kids around or 3 kids or just precious gear that you can't have your car breaking down in the middle of Manhattan on the 5:30 on a Friday? Well, then you probably need a newer vehicle, and a lease might be the only way you can afford it because new cars are just doggone expensive now. If you're just commuting yourself back and forth to work 30 miles each way, just get yourself a 5-year-old vehicle, even 75,000 miles on it. The engineering on those vehicles are through the roof. The engine's not going dead anytime soon. Yeah, you're going to have to fix the parts, the moving parts, the tires. You got to change the oil, the belts and all that, the hoses. Well, that's just maintenance, basic maintenance stuff. It's still worth it to pay a whole lot less and to finance that puppy so that way in 3 years you own it outright. And last week we talked about life insurance. Understand your employer's life insurance. Make sure you know what you have in employer's life insurance. So that way, if it's all ADD, accidental death and dismemberment, you're not stuck. If something were to happen to you via disease and then you find out your spouse is not going to make any life insurance. Let me just see, is there any other chapters I want to talk about here? I just want to make sure I'm not forgetting something. Yeah, I am. You should borrow from your 401k, for heaven's sake, going back to the debt is the enemy thing. If you have a 401k or a 403b and it gives you the opportunity to borrow, you should do it, for heaven's sake. You're going to pay the interest back to yourself plus whatever return you can get on that money you're putting back in the account. And I modeled that out in the chapter there. So look at how I modeled that out. So borrow against your 401k to pay off debt. And hopefully you'll be done with that debt and you'll never see the light of day again. The concern I have in this, and most financial planners do as well, is that one day you're going to wake up and you're going to have that same amount of debt, except now you got a loan against your 401k. And that's a problem. And of course, be advised, if you borrow against your 401k and you leave your firm before you pay the whole thing back, you will pay penalties if you're under 59.5 at 10% plus income tax on the amount that the balance is still there. Okay, so just be careful in that regard. So again, to wrap it up, this is my book. Because this is my first book, I'm just stoked to get out there as many people as I can. I've been my pleasure to send this to you free of charge. Just email me, and I'll put my email in the show notes. Just pay for the shipping. Shipping here is $3.50. I just went to the post office today. It's $3.50 in the United States. So email me, just pay me shipping. I'll print it off. I'll send it to you personally. Because if you've been hanging out on this YouTube channel and like what you see, you're important to me. And I actually, I'm very happy that you're here, and hopefully I was able to help you a little bit. But just send me an email. My email will be in the bottom of the show notes here. And just say, hey, I'd like a copy of your book. And I'll tell you exactly how to get it to me. $3.50 for shipping, and I'll put it in the mail. And, you won't have any other, it's going to come to you, first class mail, $3.50, and then you have the book. And hopefully when I do my next books, you'll buy those as well. So that's it, guys. Put comments, of course, down below. Thumbs up for me if you would. Comments are always helpful. Certainly subscribe, and don't forget hit the notification bell so you get notified of future content as well. Because my next book coming out, which I'll talk about here in a second, is 21 Reasons You Need a Roth IRA. And I think you'll find that one just as informative. I'm psyched to talk about that because that's a lot more of the tax stuff, and I love talking about taxes. This is a lot more just financial planning how-tos, married couples maybe in their 30s, early 40s. The next one's going to be geared towards more folks in their 50s because that you have a lot of opportunity there that I think a lot of people aren't aware of. So look out for that book. Send me an email if you want a copy of this book right here. I'll get out to you. Just pay shipping. Again, $3.50, and I'll put it in the mail for you ASAP. Hey, thanks. I look forward to seeing you on the next YouTube episode of the Heritage Wealth Planning YouTube Network. Thanks.